What's up, Tumnad lectures? In this video, we are looking at what we call the heart layers. If you find it helpful at the end of it all, please make sure you like the video, comment down in the comment section, and please subscribe. Let's go ahead and get started. In this video, we are going to be mainly focusing on the arrangement of the layers of what we call the heart. We are going to be taking a very small piece of the section what we call the heart. We try to zoom in out and see exactly how the layers of the heart are going to be arranged. There are three main layers of the heart. We have what we call the inner layer, we have what we call the middle layer, and even also what we call the outer layer. Let's go ahead and see how we call these layers exactly, besides calling them inner, middle, and then the outer layer, okay? You can label these kind of the layers either way, either from in going out or from out going in. Now, I'm going to be mentioning these layers starting from inside going outwards, okay? Now, when you see the whole of this layer here, this one which is a bit red, this one here, surrounding all the ventricles, even also what you call the artery, and even also lining what you call the valves. This kind of the innermost layer, this one inside here, this one here is what we call the endocardium. Okay, so now this one here, the innermost layer, this one here is what we call the endocardium. Okay, is what we call the endocardium. That is the innermost layer. Now, as you come out, we have this kind of this green kind of this layer, which is a bit very thick. How do we call this layer? This layer here is super very important, and this layer here is what we call the myocardium. Okay, this layer here is what we call the myocardium. Super very important. Okay, so now we have seen the inner layer, we have seen now the middle layer, then we go now to the outer layer. The outer layer is somehow a bit so much special. Why do I mean by this? It has a multiple of different sub layers. Let's go ahead and see them critically and how they are arranged from in going out. Okay. Now, when you see this myocardium, on its end, it is lined by this beautiful kind of this layer inside here. You see how this layer, which is going to be lining what we call the outer ends or what we call the myocardium, that layer is very much special. You know how that layer is called? This layer here, this one which is a bit black. Okay, the one which is a bit black. You know how that layer is called? That layer is what we call the epicardium. Okay, that layer is what we call the epicardium. Okay, super very important. This kind of the layer, it also has another name. It can also be called the visceral layer of what we call of the serous pericardium. Super very important. The visceral layer of the serous pericardium. Okay, it is such another beautiful thing. Now, as you come out here, we have this space here, but it will come on that one a bit later. But we also have this beautiful another kind of this layer here. You see this kind of this layer, which is like a bit blue, is very much special. This layer here, this one which is a bit like blue, this one here, this one. This layer here is what we call the parietal layer of the serous pericardium. Okay, how do we call this layer? This layer is what we call the parietal. Okay, is what we call the parietal layer of serous pericardium. Okay, so now that layer is what we call the parietal layer of the serous pericardium, and then we said that this one here is what we call the epicardium, but can also be called visceral layer of serous pericardium. Okay. Now, we now between these layers, the parietal layer and then the epicardium, we have a space, or kind of the space inside it. You know how this space is called? This space here, this one here is very important. And this kind of the space is what we call the pericardial cavity. Okay, so now this space here is what we call this space here is what we call the pericardial the pericardial cavity. Okay, super very important, having what we call the ferrous fluid, super very important, which is going to be reducing the friction as the parietal and the visceral layers of the serous pericardium are rubbing one another during the ventricular contraction and what we call relaxations. Okay, super very important. Then we also have another kind of the toughest layer. You see this layer which is like a bit red, this one here, very important. This layer is what we call the fibrous pericardium. Okay, is what we call the fibrous, is what we call the fibrous, what we call the fibrous pericardium. Okay, so now that's generally the arrangement of this kind of the layers of what we call of the heart. We are starting from inside, that's the endocardium, then the middle one, which is going to be the myocardium, and then the outer one has a multiple of different layers. You have said we have what we call the epicardium, which is going to be lining the outer part of what we call the myocardium. It can also be called the visceral layer of the serous pericardium. Okay, and then we have said that this one, which is a bit outer, is what we call the parietal layer of the serous pericardium. And the space between this kind of the parietal and then the serous layer of the serous pericardium is what we call the pericardial cavity, which is going to be containing what we call the serous fluid, which is produced by what we call the mesothelial cells of what we call the parietal and what we call the visceral layers of the serous pericardium. Okay, and then we have said that the last kind of the layer of the outer layer, this one here is what we call the fibrous pericardium, which is super very important, made up of what we call the dense irregular connective tissue, which is going to be providing, which is going to be able to withstand all the kind of the external forces acting on what we call the heart. Okay, so now, having seen the layers of the heart, let's go ahead and have a brief description on each and every layer of what we call the heart. Okay.